My name's Andrew Hull. I'm a Burke boy, but a Mildura-based artist, and my sculpture is called Paalampaltharu. Although it's not my sculpture, the story actually belongs to someone known as Mrs. Kelly, or Minnie Kelly. So I suppose as far as identifying myself goes, it'd be a bit of a long bow to call myself an Aboriginal person, but I have Aboriginal heritage, so it's somewhere in my mix. Probably the best way to describe it, my cousin has written a book about his whole family story, and it's called Under 5 Flags, and represents all the different influences that have gone to form his life. And in that story, if there was such a thing as a Barkindji Gurnu flag, that would be one of his flags, and that's probably a good way for me to explain myself as well. Somewhere in my background is this story. I do find it particularly interesting though, and I find a lot of connection with that story because it lives where I live. It comes from where I come from, the same place, the same soil, and it resonates for me. And also because I didn't realise that it was my story for a long time, so it is an interesting one for me to continue to explore and to try to better understand. So this sculpture is called Paalampaltharu, and it's not my story. It's a story of a woman that I call Mrs. Kelly. Her name was Minnie Kelly, Minnie Morrison when she was married. And that's my great-great-grandmother. And I never met her, of course, but I have extraordinary intimate details of her life because she was taken from where she lived to the Brewarrina mission in the early 1930s. And they're recorded by the anthropologist, genealogist, ethnologist Norman Tyndale, who did some work did work right around all the missions in Australia, or many of them, but certainly in the Brewarrina Aboriginal mission. And there's this documentation of her, not documentation even of her life, but of her. So I can tell you how they graded her eye colour, the shape of her nose, the colour of her skin at various different parts of her body, her height, bone structure. There's just all this detailed recording, but they don't tell any of her story, so I don't actually know her story. I know all these much more intimate details than you would ever normally know about any person. But I don't know, I can tell you the colour of her eyes, but I don't know what they look like when she smiled. I can tell you, that her upper lip had a different fullness to her bottom lip. But, I don't know what she sounded like if she laughed or spoke. So this is a way to sort of give her a story, give her story a life. So the meaning of the sculpture, it's called Paalampaltharu, and that's a Barkindji word for what it's more commonly known as is the Darling River lily. Now, this plant grows on the Darling River floodplains, so it's endemic to the same area that the Barkindji people are endemic to. It's the same, they overlap the same country, and it resonates for me because sometimes it blooms and it flourishes, and sometimes you can't see it, but it's always in the soil. One of the details we have of Mrs. Kelly says that she was identified as Gurnu tribe, with current pronunciation would be Gurnu. And that's Barkindji Gurnu, and that's around where the Warrego joins the Darling, is the upper reach of that. And in all this quite detailed documentation, there's a handwritten section where she'd obviously spoken and they took down a notation. It says, I'm from the Tilpa Louth area, which is probably the bottom reach of the Gurnu Barkindji area that we know of. And it says, and I'm a Barkindji person, a person of the river. So this sculpture tells a little bit of that story. The two branches of the flower represent the Warrego and the Darling coming together in the stream. But also, I guess, for me, all the multiple branches that stem out and that the flower, the shape the flower actually makes, represent, the multiple branches that make up a life, that make up someone's story, that, we all come from these complex lineages, and we're not one thing or another thing or definitely this or definitely that. We're a complex mixture of all this stuff, you know, but it all ends up in one river channel, all ends up as one stem on a plant, or, you know, one trunk in a family tree. And so that's sort of what the sculpture's about for me.